Thank you. Questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. After a decade of ignoring cost of living pressures and attacking real wages, will the Prime Minister now admit his latest budget shows that the average Australian worker will be $1,355 worse off this year?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can confirm that in the budget year and across the forward estimates, our real wages are forecast to increase, Mr Speaker. That's what I can confirm, Mr Speaker. I said in the budget year, Mr Speaker, and over the forward estimates, Mr Speaker, I can confirm that, and the Treasurer can add further onto the National Accounts measure, Mr Speaker. And the reason that is occurring is because under this government we've got unemployment down to 4%, Mr Speaker. Under this government we've been investing in the essential infrastructure and in our regions, Mr Speaker, and in skills, Mr Speaker, which is what is driving the Australian economy out of this pandemic at a rate of growth and a rate of employment growth, Mr Speaker, that exceeds the advanced economies of the world, whether it's the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Mr Speaker, Japan, Canada, outstripping the growth of all of these countries coming out of the pandemic. And as a result of that strong growth, by backing in Australians, backing in small businesses, backing in Australians with lower taxes, Mr Speaker, cutting the red tape, ensuring they're investing in skills, when we've got 220,000 apprentices in trade training right now, the highest level since 1963, Mr Speaker. We're investing a record $120 billion in our national infrastructure pipeline. We're getting businesses online. We're getting businesses in the data and digital economy. We're supporting our manufacturers to make things here in Australia, in everything from processing of critical minerals, Mr Speaker, to the manufacturing of important mRNA vaccines in Victoria. Mr Speaker, we are investing in Australia's future. As a result, unemployment is going down, growth is going up, and wages are increasing, Mr Speaker, and it's the strength, Mr Speaker, of the Australian economy which is going to support wages into the future. Now, those opposite, on Thursday, Mr Speaker, those opposite have an alternative budget to deliver in this place on Thursday night, and the Leader of the Opposition has one plan for wages: to write a letter, Mr Speaker. That's it. That's his only plan. He's going to write a letter to the Fair Work Commission. And we've been waiting for him to write it for 3 years, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister
will resume his seat. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. On direct relevance, the Prime Minister was not asked about alternative policies. He was asked about a real wage cut of $1,355 delivered.
The Prime Minister wasn't asked about alternatives. He was asked about the cost of living and wages. Up until then, the Prime Minister was relevant. The Prime Minister has the call.
I wasn't asked about alternative policies because there are none, Mr Speaker. They're not a small target. They're a vacant space when it comes to economic policy, Mr Speaker. You can't find a policy between them. The Australian people deserve to know what the Labor Party will do, Mr Speaker, and they haven't got a clue because the Labor Party haven't got a clue, Mr Speaker.
The member for Lindsay has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A stronger economy will create more jobs and opportunity while guaranteeing essential services, including in my community of Western Sydney. Will the Prime Minister please outline how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future will create more jobs and a strong economy?
The Prime Minister has a call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the member for Lindsay knows and the members of the government know, this is a budget, as the Treasurer said last night, that is a budget for the times. The times that are tough, Mr Speaker, the uncertainty that we see all around the world. But despite that uncertainty, the Australian economy has been coming back, Mr Speaker, faster than we've seen right across the advanced world all around the globe, Mr Speaker. And because of that, the budget is at a position that is $100 billion and more stronger over the last 12 months. And what that has enabled us to do, the hard work of Australians and the discipline of the government, Mr Speaker, in the way we have managed the budget means last night the urgent cost of living relief that Australians need to shield themselves from the increases in fuel prices, which put the price of everything else up, Mr Speaker, last night, because of the work done by the Australian people, because of the disciplined financial management, Mr Speaker, of the government, we could invest to give them that shield, to protect them from those price increases. Halving the excise, that's cutting taxes on your petrol. Every time you go to the Bowser, Mr Speaker, now, over the next couple of weeks, as that flows into the economy, Australians will receive and feel that tax relief so they can keep more of what they've earned, so they can invest it and deal with the cost of living pressures. Mr Speaker, in addition to that, we've put in place the payments for those on the pension, some $250 to help those through these difficult times as those cost pressures are on. And of course, when Australians, working Australians earning less than $126,000 a year, put in their tax return on the 1st of July, Mr Speaker, they will get an extra $420. But it's not our money, Mr Speaker, they're getting, it's their money because it's a tax cut. Because on this side, Mr Speaker, we understand that Australians should keep more of what they earn. And that's what we've delivered in lower taxes, and that's why we're going to ensure that they can keep more of what they earn right here, right now, to deal with the very real cost of living pressures that they're facing. This is a targeted plan, Mr Speaker. This is a responsible plan, Mr Speaker, and it's a temporary measure to deal with the real cost of living pressures that Australians are facing right now, Mr Speaker. And as a result, they can have confidence when they see that relief. They can know that it's been provided for, that they've worked hard to deliver it, because in the last 12 months the budget's improved by more than $100 billion. And so that sets Australia up. It sets us up for, as we come out of this pandemic, that we can look to the future with confidence. We can invest in the regions. We can invest in infrastructure. We can invest in skills and manufacturing, Mr Speaker. We can guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on, and we can invest in the security and defence of our nation, because we know how to run a strong economy, because a strong economy, Mr Speaker, means a stronger future.
The member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given 52 out of 55 of the government's wages forecasts have been wrong, and real wages will go backwards at an even higher rate this year than the last budget anticipated, why should the Australian people believe anything the Prime Minister promises on wages, especially on the eve of an election?
The Treasurer has the
Mr Speaker, I tell you what won't increase wages. That's $387 billion of higher taxes, Mr Speaker. $387 billion of higher taxes, which was Labor's policy going into the last election. Now, Mr Speaker, last year's budget, when we made a wages forecast, it actually came in at half a percentage point higher than what we had forecast, Mr Speaker. A half a percentage point higher than what we had forecast. And as the Prime Minister has outlined, in the budget year and beyond, we have forecast that the wages price index being above inflation. And what we know is the way to drive higher wages is to drive down the unemployment rate. And when Labor came to government, the unemployment rate was 4.2%. When Labor left office, the unemployment rate was 5.7%, Mr Speaker. And I can confirm to the House that the unemployment rate today is at its equal lowest in 48 years at 4%, Mr Speaker. And that female unemployment is at its lowest level since 1974, Mr Speaker. And in the budget last night, we printed a number for the unemployment rate to have a 3 in front of it for the first time in 50 years, Mr Speaker. And that belongs to 26 million Australians. And unlike those opposite, when they were presiding over the recessions in the 1980s and the 1990s, the unemployment rate remained elevated for some 10 years. This time round, it's taken just over a year to get the unemployment rate back.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. The member for Rankin on a point of order.
Yeah, relevance, Mr Speaker. You were in government in the 80s recession,
The
genius.
member for Rankin will resume his seat. The Treasurer is relevant, and return to the dispatch box. The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, the reality is the best way to drive down unemployment is to invest in the programs that we announced in last night's budget. And with a lower unemployment rate, you see upward pressure on wages.
Members on my left.
So, Mr Speaker, through this crisis, we have done everything we possibly can to help save jobs and to help put Australians into new jobs. And today there are 375,000 more Australians in work than at the start of the pandemic. That is something that belongs to all Australians, and it's the pathway to higher wages.
The member for Bass has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer explain to the House how the Morrison government is providing significant assistance to help Australian families with the cost of living, while also ensuring our economic recovery continues to strengthen?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Bass for her question and acknowledge her deep experience coming into this place as a farmer, as a local mayor, and her commitment to her local community. And she knows that in last night's budget, the numbers demonstrated that growth is higher, unemployment is lower, and wages are strengthening, and that our economic plan is working, with an unemployment rate today at its equal lowest in 48 years, and with an economic recovery that is leading the world, faster and stronger than the United States.
The Treasurer will just resume his seat for one moment. I've repeatedly pulled members up about making comments using, I think if that was the member for Whitlam, I'm not entirely sure. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But did the member for Whitlam use an unparliamentary remark?
Certainly.
I'd ask the member for Whitlam to withdraw. Don't say what it was, just withdraw.
I withdraw.
I thank the member for Whitlam, and the Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, not only did no one hear him, but no one listens to him as Mr Speaker. I mean, the reality is that Australia's economic recovery has been one of the strongest anywhere in the world, faster and stronger than the United States, than the United Kingdom, than Canada, than France, than Germany, than Italy and Japan. And in last night's budget, we announced an $8.6 billion package of measures to ease the cost of living pressures on Australian families, recognising that cost of living pressures is the #1 topic around the kitchen tables of the country. Cutting the fuel excise in half, Mr Speaker, will see a family with 2 cars that fill up once a week up to $30 a week better off, and $700 over a 6-month period. A $420 bonus to the LMITO, the low and middle income tax offset, will support more than 10 million low and middle income earners, Mr Speaker, which means if you're on $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 or $90,000 on the 1st of July, and after that you put in your tax return, you can see $1,500 in your bank account as a result of tax relief provided by this government. And also in the budget, Mr Speaker, was a $250 payment to 6 million people on income support. Veterans, pensioners, carers, people on a disability support pension, and concession card holders, including self-funded retirees, Mr Speaker. And that 6 million Australians will get that $250 payment, and for many, in addition to the indexation arrangements, which is also providing cost of living relief. And also in this budget was a measure to reduce the cost of medicines and to make them more accessible to 2.4 million Australians. So the measures we announced last night were responsible. They were targeted, they were temporary, and they were designed to provide cost of living relief for Australians who need it most.
The member for Rankin has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This Prime Minister's budget contains $3 billion in secret cuts. What are they?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know what the member opposite is referring to, Mr Speaker, and if you'll come with me, Mr Speaker, if you'll come with me to page 49, Mr Speaker, of the budget paper number 2. It's got a number 2 on it, in case you're not familiar with it. It refers to the decisions taken but not yet announced. What the member opposite doesn't understand, I'm giving you a lesson in budgets for dummies over there, Mr Speaker. Budgets for dummies. What you do, Mr Speaker, is you reduce.
I'll just ask the Prime Minister just to withdraw that comment.
Andrew Charlton.
I'll just ask the Prime Minister to withdraw that last comment.
Sorry, I withdraw, Mr Speaker. I was referring to what should be a popular publication. A popular publication for those opposite, because this Leader of the Opposition's never delivered a budget, and that Shadow Treasurer's never delivered a budget. He was involved. Oh, here he goes.
The member for Rankin on a point of... Just hold it. Members on my right. Order. The Treasurer. The member for Rankin on a point of order, and we'll go straight to the point of order, please.
Yeah, relevance, Mr Speaker. If he had an answer, he'd spit it out.
The Prime Minister is in order. The Prime Minister...
It's very simple, Mr Speaker. The line item there shows the change from last year's mid-year budget update of decisions taken but not yet announced and not for publication measures. Now, what that means is when that number goes into the negative, it means that other numbers have gone into the positive. It comes out in that column and it goes in another column, genius. Mr Speaker, it goes down one another and it goes up in the other column. That's how budget works, Mr Speaker. They don't know how to put a budget together, Mr Speaker. They have no idea. I'd suggest the Shadow Treasurer doesn't find a friend either if he ever becomes Treasurer, because his best mate on putting the budgets together was Wayne Swan, Mr Speaker. And we all know what Wayne Swan did when he was putting budgets. He assumed iron ore prices at $180 forever. He had mining taxes that didn't raise any money, Mr Speaker. These, Mr Speaker, to those opposite who would be responsible for the economic management of this country. A Leader of the Opposition who's never delivered a budget.
Member for Griffith.
He spent 6 weeks on the expenditure review committee and never delivered a budget, Mr Speaker. The Shadow Treasurer has also never delivered a budget. On this side, Mr Speaker, a Treasurer has delivered 4 budgets. A Prime Minister has delivered 3 budgets as a Treasurer, 4 budgets as a Prime Minister and 1 budget as a member of the Expenditure Review Committee. That's 8. That's 8, Mr Speaker. So I'll put my 8 budgets up to your 0 every single time, because 0 is the amount of policy we've seen from those opposite. Mr Speaker, we often speak of net zero in this place. Well, the Labor Party is net zero on policy.
The member for McEwen is warned. The level of interjections is ridiculously high, and it's coming from both sides of the chamber today. It's all that pent-up silence from last night, obviously. I would remind members that, for instance, if you're going to make a point of order on relevance and no one can hear what's being said, I wouldn't even bother rising to the dispatch box. The member for Kennedy has the call.
Deputy Prime Minister, on 4th of March, didn't you say we must be a nation of vision? One thing we can do is build Bradfield, rightly claiming this banishes flood, fire and drought. Why then have you allowed Tell, are self-appointed elitists to abolish Bradfield's Hells Gate, reducing it from 6 million megalitres to 2 million, from 120,000 hectares of western desert uplands irrigated into $4 billion of annual production to $300 million a year pygmy scheme, not out west, but adjacent to and polluting the Barrier Reef.
Just before I call the Deputy Prime Minister, I'm not going to allow the level of interjections as was on the last question, so I will start ejecting people from the chamber. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Kennedy very much. I understand his passion, and we both have a belief in a vision to build the water infrastructure. I understand what you're saying about 6 million megalitres as your proposed dam, but with Burdekin, which would be still at about 1.8, and Urana Dam at 2.1, we're getting close to 10 million megalitres of water, and that starts to put real problems on whether we get the approval through the Queensland government. I say to the member for Kennedy right now, even though Hells Gate Dam was an item of critical infrastructure for the Queensland Labor government, as well as an election promise, as was Urana Dam, where our office is still awaiting any form of correspondence back from them that they have any intention to build either, even though they don't have to put 1 cent on the table for it. And the reason for that, as the member for Kennedy knows, is the Labor Party is controlled by the Greens. And if you want confirmation of that, the member for Kennedy need only wait till tomorrow night, where we see whether the Labor Party is going to build Hells Gate, whether the Labor Party is going to build Urana, whether the Labor Party will put money on the table for Dungowan Dam, or whether they will be the party that removes this vision, because ultimately they don't stand behind the people of Gladstone, they don't stand behind the people of Townsville, they don't stand behind regional towns. They have no vision. They have never built anything of any substance that in any of their terms in government for the people that are in this room, maybe in the past, most certainly, the Chifleys and the Curtins, but the member for Kennedy knows that those people are long since gone from the Labor Party, and what we have now, and what you'll hear the next night, is an apologist to the Green sentiment that obviously the whole world is complete. All we've got to do is stop and get off. There is nowhere to go, because the member for Kennedy is very aware that if you're going to talk about how you spend money, and they're doing a fair bit of that, you've actually got to talk about how you're going to earn it. You actually got to talk about how you're going to earn it, and that is the fundamental difference that you've seen in the document that the Treasurer and the Prime Minister has put forward for our nation. They've made the brave decisions about how we earn the money. They've made the brave decisions of how we stand behind the people of Gladstone, how we stand behind these decisions. But we haven't heard anything from the Labor Party in support of that infrastructure. Yet the gentleman that sits opposite me, the member for Grayndler, used to be the infrastructure minister. And not one piece of our infrastructure apparently does he agree with, because he lacks any vision. So if you want to build Hells Gate, this is the side that's going to build it. And if you don't want anything with North Queensland, there's the alternative.
The member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Last night's budget unlocked transformational investments in ports, dams, roads and other infrastructure in our regions. Can the Prime Minister please outline to the House the importance of ports in generating wealth and to grow the nation, and how our infrastructure investments will make Australia as strong as possible, as quickly as possible? Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of alternative policies? Thank you.
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for Flynn for his question, and note his service to this nation and service to this chamber in what he's done in basically standing behind the people of Gladstone and standing behind the people of Emerald and looking after the people of Billa. This is a person who is being re-elected by his people 4 consecutive times. And that is a person of vision, and that's what we need. And he mentioned, Mr Speaker, ports, and yes, this is incredibly important, and we are investing in ports, whether it's Dampier, Port Hedland, Darwin, whether it's Bundaberg, whether it's Newcastle. So we might start with Newcastle because it's so vitally important. 25 $1.1 billion worth of produce goes out of the Port of Newcastle, coal, and it's a shame because the people on the other side, tied up by the Greens, don't support the people of the Hunter Valley. The member for Shortland is obviously very close to the Greens, and he wants to make sure he's got an issue. He talks about transitioning people out of the coal industry. That's making them unemployed. And we talk about what we are doing at the Port Hedland, where we have over $90 billion worth of produce, $90 billion worth of iron ore. This is how we pay. This is how we pay for the standard of living of our nation. And we talk about the Port of Dampier with over $40 billion worth of exports. This is so important. And the Port of Gladstone, where the member for Flynn comes with over $28 billion worth of exports. Exports such as coal, alumina, aluminium, liquefied natural gas and agricultural goods. This is how we pay the bills, and we must make sure we invest where we make money. And the Accelerator Fund that's been brought forward by this government also has so much more to add to regional areas such as Lithgow, regional areas such as Shepparton, to make sure that these places also share in the vision for our nation with the Regionalisation Fund, providing investment in regional infrastructure, the Modern Manufacturing Initiative for strengthening advanced manufacturing, the Critical Minerals Accelerator Initiative, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, because supply chains for food, fibre and minerals all start in the regions, the Australian Apprenticeships Initiative, the Trailblazer Universities Program and Education Infrastructure in Regional Australia, the National Centre for Digital Agriculture and Innovation and Adoption Hubs, the Recycling Modernisation Fund, the Export Market Development Grant Program, the Capability Improvement Grant and Sovereign Individual Capabilities Priorities Grant. I've heard people say that they think that they talk about what our vision is for weeks. We have laid down a vision for decades. We have laid down a vision to make our nation even stronger, quicker, as strong as possible. We have taken into account the changing circumstances of our globe, and we are making sure we keep the Australian people safe.
The member's time has expired. I just want to make clear the member for Macarthur was warned just a moment ago, so there's no confusion. The member for Ballarat.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And my question is to the Treasurer. At 1 a.m. this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister tweeted about the budget, and he said, "What we see, this is not a movie, not a bad dream. This is the reality now. This budget is about saying where we can make money, we will make more, as much as we can." Can the Treasurer explain what the Deputy Premier means, and does he agree?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, was talking about our motivation for the investments in this budget in our regions, Mr. Speaker. Because only one side of politics will support regional Australia, and it's this side of politics, Mr. Speaker. $100 billion of investment in regional Australia since we have come to government. And last night's budget laid down another $21 billion of investment in our regions, with investment in infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, whether it's water infrastructure like the Hells Gate Dam, Mr. Speaker, which can help create more agriculture production which can be exported to the world, creating jobs here at home, whether it's our $1.3 billion telecommunications package to support regional Australia and to deal with black spots and build greater connectivity, whether it's the work we did in terms of regional health to give more people in regional Australia access to MRI machines when they need it, Mr. Speaker, and regional doctors. We are encouraging people to undertake training as a doctor and to work and live in our regions, Mr. Speaker, and transport infrastructure like Outback Way. And there are numerous other programs that are designed, Tanami Road, to create jobs across the region. And as the Deputy Prime Minister outlined, a $2 billion accelerator fund with further investments in export market development grants, in our manufacturing initiative, in our modern recycling plan. Mr. Speaker, in creating more apprentices across regional Australia, And then, of course, the $7.1 billion in 4 priority areas across the Northern Territory, the Middle Arm, Mr Speaker, in the Pilbara, in Western Australia, in the Hunter, in New South Wales, and then unlocking the potential of the Bertigan in North and Central Queensland, Mr Speaker. These are our policies. These are our policies to create the jobs of the future. They're in our budget. They're part of our vision for a stronger economy and a stronger Australia.
Great. The member for Fenner has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
The member for Fenner, I'll deal with it by doing 2 members of the government next time. Member for Fenner has the call. Member for Fenner has the call. Order.
Has any Prime Minister ever taken a worse set of debt and deficit figures to an election?
Who's the question to?
The question, well, I didn't hear who the question was directed to. I don't need members on my right to be giving me gratuitous advice. Thank you.
Speaker, I began by saying the question was to the Prime Minister. You interrupted and then called the member. If it assists the House, I'm happy to restate in full.
Members on my right. I'll get you to state the question again, member for Fenner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Has any Prime Minister ever taken a worse set of debt and deficit figures to an election?
The Prime Minister has a call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for his question on debt and deficit, Mr Speaker. Well, I can tell him that we've just had the biggest rebound in a budget, Mr Speaker, in 70 years, and I haven't seen a Prime Minister do that in a very long time in this place, Mr Speaker, because over the course of just the last 12 months, we have had a $100 billion improvement in the budget over the forward estimates, which enables us, Mr Speaker, to invest for the future, definitely, but also to provide the cost of living relief here and now. Now, Mr Speaker, I hear those opposite talk about debt and deficit, Mr Speaker, and they ask, Mr Speaker, what have we got to show for it? We've got 700,000 people who are still in jobs, Mr Speaker, to show for it, Mr Speaker. We've got a Western Sydney airport that's being built that the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Transport Minister for 6 years, couldn't get even off the ground, Mr Speaker. He couldn't even get it off the ground. And here he is chipping away, Mr Speaker. He spoke about it for 11 years in opposition. 11 years in opposition, whining about the Western Sydney airport. He had 6 years to do something about it, and he didn't even dig a hole, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? No. The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. On direct relevance was a very tight question that contained no element of alternative policies.
The Deputy Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. On the contrary, the question was not a very tight question. When questions are asked in the way that they were, that is certainly leading a broad response. The Prime Minister has the call. No, the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The investments and the economic interventions that this government has made during the course of the pandemic saved the Australian economy. It kept 700,000 people in jobs. It ensured, Mr Speaker, with more than $40 billion of investment in our health response, Mr Speaker, ensured we saved 40,000 lives. 40,000 lives. And we have, Mr Speaker, on the Global Pandemic Preparedness Index, Australia is rated 2nd in the world. That's what it achieved, Mr Speaker. An achievement of the Australian people that has been barely matched anywhere around the world. And we stepped up in the pandemic And what we hear from the opposition with these chips about these issues is they're for it and they're against it, Mr Speaker. They're against it and they're for it. We've even heard it, Mr Speaker, from the shadow Treasurer over there, Mr Speaker. Shadow Treasurer, who's today saying they're going to support the cost of living measures, even though they don't support them, Mr Speaker. That's what we've heard from the Labor Party, classic Labor Party. They support things just as much as they oppose things. And that's why on Thursday night, Mr Speaker, I'll be listening out for the alternative budget, but I don't think I'll get one, Mr Speaker. I'll be listening out for it for the alternative plan, our plan, Mr Speaker.
I'll just remind the Prime Minister there's nothing in the question about alternative policies.
Understand. Mr Speaker, our plan, the Australian people know, is set out in this budget. Our plan, Mr Speaker, sets out the investments in manufacturing, in energy, Mr Speaker, in dams, in roads, Mr Speaker, in lower taxes, and ensuring we're supporting Australia to deal with cost of living pressures right now.
And I give the call to the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer explain to the House how the Morrison government's strong economic management in the face of numerous challenges shows that it is only the coalition that can responsibly manage the budget and strengthen our nation's finances? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And
Members on my left.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wentworth for his question and acknowledge that he has been an outstanding diplomat for our nation, Mr Speaker, and an outstanding member for Wentworth. Now, Mr Speaker, it's important to understand that in last night's budget, it demonstrated that the economy is growing, that growth is higher, unemployment is lower, and wages are strengthening. And when you consider how far our country has come over the last 2 years, it is remarkable. At the peak of the crisis, Treasury thought the unemployment rate could be as high as 15%, Mr Speaker. And the Labor Party set us the task, in their words, in the member for Rankin's own words. The single biggest test for the Morrison government's management of the pandemic would be what happens to unemployment and jobs, Mr Speaker. That was the test the Labor Party set for us. And I can confirm to the House that the unemployment rate today in Australia is the equal lowest in 48 years at 4%, Mr Speaker. And that, Mr Speaker, that female unemployment is at its lowest level since 1974. And that when those opposite came to government, the unemployment rate was 4.2%, and when they left government, it was 5.7%. And as a result of a stronger economy, we are seeing revenue upgrades which we are banking to the bottom line, with an improvement of more than $100 billion to the bottom line, Mr Speaker, 3/4 of which has been driven by a stronger labour market. Unlike those opposite, we haven't baked into the budget commodity price assumptions at unrealistically high levels. That's what Labor did. We have kept commodity price assumptions at a conservative level, Mr Speaker, so that we didn't put expenditure across those commodity prices. We've seen the deficit, Mr Speaker, as a share of the economy more than halve over the forward estimates, and then more than halve again by the end of the medium term. This is a responsible budget. There are temporary and targeted measures to ease cost of living. There's measures to improve the productivity and the growth of the economy and create more jobs. But there's also a significant and material improvement to the budget bottom line, the product of an economic plan that is working, that is seeing unemployment come down, more people in work paying tax, less people on welfare requiring payments. That is a sign of a strong economy.
We're going to go to the government side. The member for Ryan has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House of the Morrison government's strong record of creating jobs and reducing unemployment, particularly through our investments in skills and apprenticeships, and how this will help secure a stronger future, delivering on our long-term economic plan?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Ryan for his question, acknowledge his experience as a Treasurer himself at the Brisbane City Council, which, Mr Speaker, is a significant council. Yes, as the Prime Minister reminds me, he's done more budgets than the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition. And by the way, more budgets than the Shadow Treasurer as well.
True.
That's right.
That's true.
Mr Speaker, one of the real success stories of Australia's response to the pandemic has the fact that we now see more Australians in work than ever before. There are in fact nearly 2 million more Australians in work than when we came to government. There are 375,000 more Australians in work than at the start of the pandemic. We've seen youth unemployment come down below 10% for the first time in a decade, Mr Speaker. We have seen female unemployment at its lowest level since 1974. And we have seen the headline unemployment rate get down to its lowest level, the equal lowest level in 48 years at 4%. This is not luck. This is a result of an economic plan that has been working. The JobKeeper program that helped save 700,000 jobs. Yep. The cash flow boost that helped support small businesses. The work we did in our aviation industry. We didn't buy an airline like Virgin. We absolutely allowed the private sector to sort that out, Mr Speaker, and as a result we now have 2 strong domestic airlines. But one of the real signs of a strong economy is the increasing number of people taking up a trade apprenticeship. And to see more than 220,000 people in a trade apprenticeship right now, the highest since records began in 1963, is a sign of a strong and healthy economy. And we put in place a 50% wage subsidy, which was really important in giving employers the confidence to keep those workers on. Chippies, Mr Speaker. Plumbers, Mr Speaker. Sparkies, Mr Speaker. Not like Steve Irons, Mr Speaker. Hairdressers, Mr Speaker. Chefs, Mr Speaker. Apprentices that have been kept on through the crisis, and now more apprentices are being kept on. That is a sign of a growing economy, and last night we put $2.8 billion in the budget for further investments in apprentices, which will see $5,000 payments to the apprentices themselves and $15,000 payments to the employers who take them on, helping to boost both the commencement and the completion rates. So, Mr Speaker, we are really proud of what the Australian people have achieved throughout this crisis, to see us avoid the economic abyss, to see the unemployment rate at 4% and going even lower. That is a sign of a strong economic recovery that is leading the world.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's budget delivers $1 trillion of debt and rort after rort after rort. Is that why page 154 of budget paper number 4 allocates no staff to a National Anti-Corruption Commission in this year or the next?
The Minister has the call.
Well, I do thank the Shadow Attorney-General for his question and for his many distinguished years of service as the Shadow Attorney-General. Mr Speaker, the Shadow Attorney-General asks questions about the Commonwealth Integrity Commission, a policy framework on which we've done detailed, thorough and rigorous work. Mr Speaker, a nationwide consultative process, 333 written submissions, 46 consultations, and we've got very detailed legislation ready to introduce, Mr Speaker. And I repeat the point that we stand ready to introduce this legislation just as soon as the Labor Party indicates that it wants to work with us to achieve this important public policy reform. Mr Speaker, we stand ready to do that, but unfortunately we have not seen the cooperation across the aisle that we would like to see. But, Mr Speaker, let me address the Shadow Attorney-General's anxiety, because I know he is very worried about employment opportunities for wig-wearing silks He's troubled that they have a limited number of employment opportunities. Let me assure the House, Mr Speaker, that our government has committed $172.1 million over 4 years from 2022-23, including capital expenditure, to establish the Commonwealth Integrity Commission. So, I do encourage him to perhaps go out and get himself a new wig, and there may even be an opportunity for him there at some time in the future.
The member for Moncrieff has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future includes key defence investment that will help to ensure Australians are kept safe and secure from all threats?
The Minister for Defence has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Moncrieff for her question, and like all of us on this side of the House, we want to make sure that we can help to protect Australians online. We want to keep their households safe, we want to keep their businesses safe, and we want to keep our institutions safe. As we've seen in the Ukraine, there is a significant amount of cyber attack that's taken place on the Ukraine, and whilst Australians understand the investment that we've made into nuclear-propelled submarines and the money that we're putting into tanks and into additional staff within the Australian Defence Force and additional fighter jets, etc., to keep our country safe, Mr Speaker, this is the latest instalment in our plan to keep Australians safe. And we are pledging about $10 billion, Mr Speaker, over the course of the next decade, because whilst Australians may not see the activity online every day, our country is already under attack online. We know that there are state actors such as Iran, such as North Korea, such as Russia, such as China, who are attacking Australian systems each day, Mr Speaker. And we've seen in other jurisdictions where they have been able to infiltrate systems, they have been able to affect the water supply, Mr Speaker, they have been able to affect the energy networks, telecommunications networks, and we realise that we have to invest more into the Australian Signals Directorate, which is part of the Australian Defence Force, the men and women who are involved in defending our systems. And this is, as I say, Mr Speaker, a $10 billion investment. It's interesting to look at the words, Mr Speaker, of the UK's Strategic Command General Sir Patrick Sanders, who says, if this was an air war, it would be the Blitz. The intensity and the frequency of the attacks are on the same scale, and if we let too many so-called bombers and their payloads through, then it will sow the seeds of defeat. And if we allow people into our telecommunications network, if we allow our banking system to be closed down, that would have catastrophic consequences on confidence in this country, and it would result in our personal records being exploited, and it would result, Mr Speaker, in very significant economic damage being done to our country. So this side of the parliament, Mr Speaker, has invested consistently into the Australian Defence Force. We back the men and women of the Australian Defence Force, Mr Speaker. We have a plan to keep Australians safe. We have a plan to defend our country, and this, Mr Speaker, is a very important frontier. We're putting money into development along with our partners in space technologies, in AI, in quantum, and we're keeping Australians safe online, Mr Speaker. We will continue to do so. We can only invest this money because of the management of the budget and because of the management, Mr Speaker, over the course of the last couple of years, that has resulted in our ability to keep our country safe.
Yes, on indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Join with the Defence Minister in praising those great men and women at the Australian Signals Directorate, and I thank the Minister as well for helping to facilitate a visit from me to ASD headquarters here in Canberra. They do a great job keeping us safe, and this will be even more important in the future.
The member for Griffith has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday I raised the predicament of the Khan family in my electorate who had one member approved for a flood relief payment and others rejected. They were without power for 27 days. I provided further information to the Prime Minister's office as requested. Can the Prime Minister confirm that instead of receiving further assistance, his government is now demanding that the only member of the Khan family to receive the flood payment pay it back?
The Prime Minister has a call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question. In the course of since the question time yesterday and question time today, I have not had the opportunity to review that information, Mr Speaker, as you'd imagine, over the course of the last 24 hours of the delivery of the budget and the many other matters that attend to that. But I'll undertake to review the information that the member has raised and get back to her as soon as I can, Mr Speaker.
The member for Higgins has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment, representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future makes significant investments in the long-term safety, health and economic security of women across Australia?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Higgins for her question and note her strong leadership with all matters pertaining to women and girls in her electorate. Mr Speaker, this is our second women's budget and together they have delivered $5.5 billion. This budget supports Australian women at every stage, every age and every walk of life, and we have the serious investment that backs that right in. Now, the women's workforce participation rate is at a record high. The women's unemployment rate is at a record low. There are more women in jobs and they're better paying jobs than they ever were before. The economic plan outlined by the Treasurer last night will improve the outcomes and opportunities for women, and it will deliver an even stronger, more productive economy. And that, of course, gives women greater choice, greater flexibility and greater economic security. As I said, there are more women in highly skilled jobs than ever before, taking up more leadership positions, now holding over 50% of Australian government board positions, compared to 41.7% when we came into government. Now, I know, Mr Speaker, that despite this progress, there remains a range of barriers to women's workforce participation. So this budget invests nearly $500 million in women's economic security measures to address these barriers, and front and centre is our enhanced paid parental leave for families. It means that eligible working parents can share up to 20 weeks of fully flexible entitlements between them, because we know that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to parental leave and family arrangements. This budget is about delivering the essential services that women need, and women's safety is absolutely paramount. Now, we talked about an enormous down payment at the last budget of over $1 billion in women's safety. Once more, we're building on that, investing a further $1.3 billion based on the 4 pillars of our next national plan, because we understand that in order to work towards ending all forms of violence against women and children, we have to have a sustained, collaborative national effort. We have to address the drivers of this violence so we keep women safe at home, at school, at work, online and in the community. So within our women's safety package, there are measures such as our Escaping Violence program, greater access to dedicated legal services to really support victims of sexual assault, new models of care to access trauma-informed recovery. The Morrison government is deeply committed to the safety, security and opportunity of Australian women, and this budget reflects that.
The member for McMahon has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. After the recent devastating floods, New South Wales Nationals MP Jeff Provost said there's real venom out there directed at the Prime Minister, that he doesn't understand what's occurring on the ground. This is like a remake of the bushfires 2 years ago. The federal government is disconnected with the good people of Australia and we're paying the price for it here. I think they should hang their heads in shame. As New South Wales suffers more serious flooding, why does the Prime Minister always do too little, too late?
The Prime Minister.
I don't share the views of Mr Provost, Mr Speaker, and the support that the government has provided through the Australian Defence Forces, Mr Speaker. Right now there are 3,280 Australian Defence Force members in the Northern Rivers there to support people. As in the Northern Rivers right now, they go through the unthinkable trauma of facing yet another flood, Mr Speaker, in the matter of just a number of weeks. And already, Mr Speaker, in the 7 local government areas that have been affected by these floods, federal government has already made payments of $211,649,893.52. That is in a matter of weeks, Mr Speaker, delivering much-needed cash and income support for people who have been devastated by these floods. And in total across New South Wales, Mr Speaker, some $2.1 billion, including these investments, has been made to support the people of New South Wales who are affected by these floods. Almost $1 billion, Mr Speaker, has also been made available to support those impacted by the floods in south-east Queensland, including the investments we're making with the Queensland Government. Now, Mr Speaker, the rebuilding process there will be a big task. And I want to thank again the member for Page, who I have no doubt, Mr Speaker, rather than being here, would like to be back in his electorate, standing alongside his constituents, as I'm sure the member for Richmond would also, Mr Speaker. And if she's there, well, I commend her for being there, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure the member for Page would very much like to be there. And, Mr Speaker, I would cast no aspersions on a member of this place for being there and being here, Mr Speaker. I think that's very important, because, Mr Speaker, we are going to continue to stand by the people of the Northern Rivers, of south-east Queensland, of the Hawkesbury, Mr Speaker, all of which have been devastated by floods, but none more so than those in the Northern Rivers. And the response that we've made to get the Australian Defence Force, and when the floods hit, Mr Speaker, in the Northern Rivers on that Sunday night, on Monday by lunchtime, the Australian Defence Forces were winching people off roofs, Mr Speaker. They moved fast to get in there and help people and to ensure that they were carrying people to safety. I met one of those chopper pilots, Mr Speaker, when I went there, and I spent time with the Defence Forces who had been assisting those in that local community. The danger, Mr Speaker, the dangers that they encountered. And they weren't the only ones I visited, Mr Speaker. I wasn't going to put cameras in people's faces, Mr Speaker. I went and sat with them in their homes, in their farms, Mr Speaker, in their businesses, and listened carefully to the sort of support they needed. The Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, is barking across the table. And, Mr Speaker, what that demonstrates is we've got a Leader of the Labor Party who's very happy to...
Prime Minister's time has expired. Member for Sydney. The member for Sturt has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the minister update the House on how the Morrison government's plan for a stronger future strengthens Australia's sovereign manufacturing capabilities and secures supply chains?
The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Sturt for his question. His steadfast commitment to manufacturing in this country and in his electorate. Over 5,100 people in his electorate working in the manufacturing sector, and he knows how important a sovereign manufacturing capability is to this country, Mr Speaker. It gives us a stronger economy and a stronger future. Now, Mr Speaker, this budget has backed in an additional $1 billion of funding for Australian manufacturing. That's $750 million in the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, Mr Speaker, $200 million for supply chain resilience to make sure we have the products we need when we need it, as we did with AdBlue just before Christmas, Mr Speaker, which is now largely manufactured in this country to keep the wheels of industry, to keep our heavy vehicles moving, Mr Speaker. And that builds on the more than $925 million of funding that we've committed to specific initiatives under the Modern Manufacturing Strategy. investments that are driving new manufacturing activity, jobs, investment across this great country, investments, Mr Speaker, that are critical to producing the materials we need, where we need them, and when we need them. Now, Mr Speaker, the space sector is one of our national manufacturing priorities, and it offers enormous opportunity for Australia. We use them every day here in Australia, navigating in our cars, using our phones, Mr Speaker. Our farmers use them to guide their headers and their tractors, Mr Speaker, to monitor their crops, and emergency workers use them as well, Mr Speaker, to do their work every day. Now, Mr Speaker, we're making significant investment in the space manufacturing sector, including $20 million to establish the Australian Space Manufacturing Hub in South Australia, which will create 1,300 jobs, Mr Speaker. But we're also investing alongside Gilmore Space Technologies in the Gold Coast, Mr Speaker, a local manufacturer using cutting-edge, world-beating technology indeed, and they're expecting to get their first commercial payload into orbit later this year, Mr Speaker. I was with them in the Gold Coast just last week. We're investing $52 million alongside them, expected to create 850 jobs, including 350 jobs for local engineers and tradies. And as the CEO and founder, Adam Gilmore, we saw his brother James as well, said the space industry has asked for help from the federal government and the federal government has responded. That is fantastic. Mr Speaker, projects like this is how we drive a stronger economy, a stronger future for this country, Mr Speaker, and stronger Australian manufacturing at its core.
The member for Blair has the floor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. Yesterday, the Minister told the House there was $96 million in the budget to clear up the backlog of veterans' compensation claims. Today, can the Minister tell the House in which budget paper and on what page the $96 million can be found? If he tells us the missing money is in the contingency reserve, what is the expenditure contingent upon?
The Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the member for Blair for his question, but member for Blair, please tell me that that is not the best question that you've got. Please tell me that you have something more out there to give to this House, because at the end of the day, now I want you to listen to this. I want you to listen to this. I want you to listen to this. At the end of the day, it's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about the critics, it's about the veterans out there. It's about working for veterans and serving veterans and supporting their welfare. Now, Mr Speaker, $96 million has been secured to clear up the unacceptably high backlog of veteran compensation claims. And as I said on Saturday, Mr Speaker, when I said on Saturday there would be $22.8 million as a line item in the budget, that's exactly what there was, Mr Speaker, because when I said that, Mr Speaker, the budget had already gone to the printers. And I also said yesterday, Mr Speaker, that there would be over $73 million in the contingency fund, and there is, Mr Speaker. $96 million has been secured, Mr Speaker, and I have to say, Mr Speaker, I have been absolutely overwhelmed by the hundreds of emails of support that I have received from veterans around Australia, both in the ministerial office and in the electorate office, from the messages that I have seen. And you know what they've said, Mr Speaker? They're glad that someone has gone into bat for them and called it like it is and stuck their neck out to get something done. So I don't resile from it, Mr Speaker. I was at a Veterans morning tea with Senator Seselja this morning, Mr Speaker, and that's exactly what the veterans were saying. But it's a great opportunity, Mr Speaker, to talk about the other important measures that were delivered in the budget. There was Mr Speaker. There was $70 million to improve the fees paid to veteran home care providers, Mr Speaker, making sure that our vulnerable veterans can get the help and support that they need. Mr Speaker,
all right, the member for Blair will resume his seat, the minister. The question, just as a question that's asked, can't be asked for a yes or a no answer. The minister is being relevant to the topic of the question. No. The minister has the call.
You're just wasting the time of the House, Member for Blair. You really are.
The minister is reminded that those remarks are made to the chair.
Our veterans put their country above themselves, and they expect a higher form of service from the people in this House, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate all of the support that I have received from the veteran community, and I want them to know that I'm with them all the way, Mr. Speaker. We are determined to get them the support that they need and the support that they deserve. And they deserve nothing less from you, from me and everyone in this House, and I will not be backing down from supporting them. And I stand by everything I've said, and I stand by everything that I've done.
The minister will resume his seat. The member for Mallee has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture and Northern Australia. Will the minister outline how the Morrison-Joyce government plan for a stronger future is continuing to invest in and support the agriculture industry as it grows towards $100 billion by 2030?
The Minister for Agriculture and Northern Australia has.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Mallee for a question that acknowledged the rich and proud history of the Mallee area in producing some of Australia's finest food and fibre, and in fact will play a very significant role in Australian agriculture for the first time in our nation's history, producing more than $80 billion worth of output. To put this in perspective, only about 6 years ago we were producing $40 to $45 billion worth of production. And that's because we've been putting in environment infrastructure around our farmers. And our Ag 2030 plan goes directly to that. And our budget since announcing our Ag 2030 plan has put over $2 billion towards that environment and infrastructure. Trade is pivotal to us as an Australian agricultural sector. We're a nation of 26 million people. We produce enough food and fibre for 80 million people. So if we don't trade with the world, don't engage with the world, then we don't need as many farmers. And so in the last two budgets, there has been in excess of $500 million in modernising our trading platforms. And in fact, for the first time, we are giving our farmers individual portals to be able to identify export opportunities for them at the farm gate. A world first. We're also putting more boots on the ground in embassies and high commissions, breaking down those technical barriers that have stopped us from getting market access commodity by commodity. But we're also protecting Brand Australia with a record spend in biosecurity, over $1 billion in making sure we protect our borders from pests and diseases decimating Australian agriculture. And we're doing that with new technology as well as putting more boots on the ground and more paws on the ground. In fact, we're also now putting robotic paws on the ground to be robotic dogs into areas that the Labradors can't go to. But we're the first country in the world to embrace X-ray technology, 3D X-ray technology, with artificial intelligence that is checking every one of the 144 million parcels that go through Australia Post. And we will extend these for the first time in a trial with New Zealand to go through the airports to understand what is in your bag before you leave New Zealand. These are world firsts that we are undertaking. But the world firsts don't stop there. We are the first country in the world to also protect Brand Australia in being able to measure and improvement in biodiversity. Our carbon farming projects will now not only be able to get a carbon payment but a biodiversity payment, because we are the first country in the world to be able to measure an improvement in biodiversity. So our farmers will get those two payments, plus we will be branding their product with a seal for their wheat, their beef, their wool, that says to the world that it is the most sustainably produced in the world. This is the environment that we are putting around Australian agriculture to grow the jobs, to make sure that regional and rural Australia benefit from a strong agricultural sector well into 2030.
The member for Oxley has.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Frank and his family live in Goodna in my electorate. Frank will be 80 soon. For the second time, first in 2011 and now with the recent flood, Frank's house was completely inundated and he has lost everything. Why has Frank received $2,000 less than New South Wales flood victim? Is it because Frank lives in Queensland?
The Prime Minister has a call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. The answer is no, Mr Speaker. No, that is not the reason, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, across New South Wales and Queensland, there were floods of different intensity. And in northern New South Wales, Mr Speaker, there was a 1 in 500-year flood, as advised to us by the scientific agencies who advise us on these matters. And the member opposite would know that whether it was in the Hawkesbury, Mr Speaker, or in south-east Queensland, the recovery and the payments, Mr Speaker, that were made to flood victims were consistent with the disaster recovery payments that have always been paid in response to floods or bushfires. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite may want to play politics with natural disasters, but, Mr Speaker, I'm not going to do that, Mr Speaker. The federal government has made payments of $1.3 billion, Mr Speaker, to 1.4 million Australians. The ADF has been on the ground in south-east Queensland, where the Minister of Defence and I, Mr Speaker, the Minister of Defence and I went out to Enoggera Barracks, Mr Speaker, as they was preparing to go and support flood victims right across south-east Queensland. And in Queensland,
the Prime Minister will
Speaker,
resume his seat for one moment. I appreciate these things are very emotional for members that are directly impacted by their communities. The member for Oxley has just received his final warning. He will not get another one. The member for Oxley will sit and listen in silence to the answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And so the government, as I went to Enoggera Barracks with the Minister of Defence, and they deployed, Mr Speaker. And the Australian Defence Forces deployed at four times the size and almost a week faster, Mr Speaker, than the response during the 2011 floods. I want to commend the ADF for the work they've done in South Queensland.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order. Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. On relevance, the question wasn't about the ADF. It was about Frank in Goodna, in the member for Oxley's electorate.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Prime Minister is being relevant to the question, and the member for Isaacs is warned. The Prime Minister has a call.
So in addition to the disaster recovery payments that have been paid in Queensland, Mr Speaker, in addition to the extensive Australian Defence Force support that has been put in place, we also have joined with the Queensland Government in a $558.5 million package of supports to support those impacted by the south-east Queensland floods. Mr Speaker, the floods in northern New South Wales were 1 in 500-year events, and the advice we received from agencies, Mr Speaker, was those events qualified for an even higher level of funding that has ever been provided before because of the absolute intensity of that flood event in northern New South Wales. Mr Speaker, we'll continue to stand with all of those affected by the floods, and the swift response the swift provision of payments to all of those affected by floods and the additional supports provided to those in northern New South Wales who, as we even speak, as the waters went over the levee this morning, Mr Speaker, we will be there with them to support them each and every step of the way.
The member for Robertson has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. Will the minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's budget is supporting families by providing access to life-saving medicines and genetic testing for conditions such as spinal muscular atrophy?
The Minister for Health has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Robertson, who's been a great advocate of support for rare cancers and rare diseases, and indeed there's $750 million in the budget last night for the 10-year Medical Research Future Fund plan focusing on rare cancers, rare diseases, clinical trials. But in particular, in relation to spinal muscular atrophy, the House will be aware of the case of Rachel Casella and her beautiful baby Mackenzie. Mackenzie was lost as a young child to SMA, an agonising condition. In response to that, the Prime Minister, in his earlier role as Treasurer, supported the creation of Mackenzie's mission. That mission provided genetic carrier screening to thousands of families. Last night, this Treasurer, in this budget, made Mackenzie's mission permanent and universal for all Australian women to offer carrier screening for potential couples around Australia for cystic fibrosis, for Fragile X and for spinal muscular atrophy, to give parents the option of knowing whether they might be carriers and therefore to proceed to IVF. This will make a profound difference to families. But there's another family and another mother who's had a huge impact on awareness of spinal muscular atrophy. In the chamber, with her hand up, is Julie Seni. Some years ago, Julie lost not just one child but two children, Montana and Zali, to SMA. And she's been a campaigner ever since. She campaigned for the listing of Spinraza, which this Prime Minister listed and which this Treasurer extended for treatment of SMA. Last night, a medicine called Zolgensma was listed by the Treasurer. This medicine is now on the PBS. It would otherwise cost $2.5 million, beyond the reach of virtually any family in Australia or around the world. And this medicine offers a potential near cure for SMA. For children under 9 months, it means that they have a chance at a full life, at a rich life, and that will be a legacy that is left not just by those who are on the benches here, but by Julie and all those who have fought for Spinraza, Zolgensma, Mackenzie's mission. These are the practical things that we do. That's what we're doing. But Rachel and Mackenzie, Julie, Montana and Zali, they are the reason, they are the why, that is why, and these are the people for whom we do what we do.
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I rise briefly to pay tribute to Anna George. Anna George has been a formidable figure in the Labor Party's recent history. She began work here in 1989 for John Dawkins when he was Education Minister and then Treasurer. She went on to work for leaders of the opposition, Kim Beazley, Simon Crean and Mark Latham, and then went on to work in the Chief Government or Opposition Whip's office for Roger Price, Joel Fitzgibbon and Chris Hayes. I can't think of another staff member that I've seen in my time here, and indeed before when I was a staff member, who has contributed over such a long period of time as Anna George has. Her knowledge of the Parliament and parliamentary procedures is second to none in the building. She always has a friendly demeanour. She organises when people should be in a particular place and make sure that they're there, including here in this chamber. Anna George is a great human being, and we will miss her dearly. We say to Anna, who, when we presented her with flowers and champagne just before question time, she said she was going to come back as a volunteer. Well, I make this offer to Anna that you are welcome to come back, not just as a volunteer, but in any capacity whatsoever at any time, and we thank you for your contribution. Thank the government for the indulgence.
The Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. A document is tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the document will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
Was the member for Kennedy seeking the call?
Speaker, I seek to make a personal explanation.
Does the member for Kennedy claim to be misrepresented?
I do, yes.
The member for Kennedy has the call.
Whilst I'm a supporter of primary industries and have many good friends who are farmers, I'm not a supporter of production of marijuana farms. There is a website using my name to approach media and speak in my name. I have no affiliation with this or any other website with the exception of bobcat.com.au and kp.org.au. We know this place is legalised marijuana, and of course we know that there's no wonder that the country has gone to pot. But I am not part of the problem, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the member for Kennedy. I present the Commonwealth Ombudsman's quarterly report under the section 712 capital F subsection 6 of the Fair Work Act 2009 for the period 1 July to 30 September 2021. I've received a letter from the honourable member for Rankin proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the failure of the government's budget to make up for a decade of attacks on wages and job security. I call upon those honourable members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places, and I give the call to the member for Rankin.
Very good of you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks very much for the opportunity.